morning. A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 10. The men finished their meeting. They all stood and walked past Naya's house. Naya joined the crowd of children following them. A few minutes' walk beyond her house there was a tree. The men stopped at the tree, and the strangers talked to Naya's uncle some more. There was another tree some 50 paces past the first one. With Naya's uncle beside him, one of the men stopped at the halfway point. The other man walked the rest of the way and examined the second tree. The first man called out to his friend in a language Naya did not understand. The friend answered in the same language, but as he walked back toward the group, he translated for the chief, and Naya could hear him. "This is the spot, halfway between the two largest trees. We will find the water here." Naya shook her head. What were they talking about? She knew that place like the back of her own hand. It was there between the two trees that the village sometimes gathered to sing and talk around a big fire. There wasn't a single drop of water on that spot, unless it was raining. I'm going to stop here for a minute. I think we know that the spot where the water is underground, and we got that kind of information from reading our nonfiction article, Thirst. Southern Sudan, 1985. So if you remember, yesterday we read about how Salva saw some people that were in the desert on the ground, and they desperately needed water. Some of them were dead, some of them were dying, and we kind of talked about the hard decision of whether do you give them water or don't you give them water. And we looked at the theme message of, like, sometimes in life there are decisions you have to make where there is no right or wrong answer. Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva reached for his gourd. He knew it to be half full, but suddenly it felt much lighter, as if there was hardly any water left in it. Uncle Jawir must have guessed what he was thinking. "No, Salva," he murmured. "You are too small and not strong enough yet. Without water, you will not survive the rest of the walk. Some of the others, they'll be able to manage better than you." Sure enough, there were now 3 women giving water to the men on the ground. Like a miracle, the small amounts of water revived them. They were able to stagger to their feet and join the group as the walking continued. But their 5 dead companions were left behind. There were no tools with which to dig, and besides, burying the dead men would have taken too much time. Salva tried not to look as he walked past the bodies, but his eyes were drawn in their direction. He knew what would happen. Vultures would find the bodies and strip them of their rotting flesh until only the bones remained. He felt sick at the thought of those men first dying in such a horrible way and then having even their corpses ravaged. If he were older and stronger, would he have given water to those men? Or would he, like most of the group, have kept his water for himself? I'm going to stop here real quick. I'm going to make an inference or a guess that Salva would have given them water because he did try to reach for his water at first and his uncle told him no. And I think that's because Salva knows what it's like to be left behind by strangers or not helped by strangers. If you remember, the women in the barn left him and weren't going to help him. So he has that experience of how strangers ignored him when he really needed them. And I think that's why he would probably give them water. I think that this is a good point to show that characters in stories make decisions based on their experiences or things that they've gone through in the past. It was the group's 3rd day in the desert. By sunset, they would be out of the desert, and after that, it would not be far to the Itang refugee camp in Ethiopia. As they trudged through the heat, Salva finally had a chance to talk to Uncle about a worry that had been growing like a long shadow across his thoughts. "Uncle, if I'm in Ethiopia, how will my parents ever find me? When will I be able to go back to Lona Reek?" "I have talked to the others here," Uncle said. "We believe that the village of Lona Reek was attacked, probably burned. Your family..." Uncle paused and looked away, and when he looked back again, his face was solemn or sad serious. "Salva, few people survived the attack on the village. Anyone still alive would have fled into the bush, and no one knows where they are now." Salva was silent for a moment, and then he said, "At least you'll be there with me in Ethiopia." Uncle's voice was gentle. No, Salva. I'm going to take you to the refugee camp, but then I'm going to return to Sudan to fight in the war. Salva stopped walking and clutched Uncle's arm. But, Uncle, I will have no one. Who will be my family? So, this again is an example of Salva being dependent on someone else. Uncle gently loosened Salva's grip so he could take the boy's hand in his. There'll be many other people in the camp. You'll become friends with some of them, and you'll make a kind of family there. They, too, will need people they can depend on. Salva shook his head, unable to imagine what life would be like in the camp without Uncle, and he squeezed Uncle's hand tightly. Uncle stood quietly and said nothing more. He knows this will be hard for me, Salva realized. He doesn't want to leave me there, but he has to go back and fight for our people. I mustn't act like a baby. I must try to be strong. So I think this is a point where we're finally seeing some change in Salva, where he's becoming a little more independent and mature. Salva swallowed hard. Uncle, when you get back to Sudan, you might meet my parents somewhere. You could tell them where I am, or you could talk to those you meet and ask where the people of Lonarik are now. Uncle did not answer right away, and then he said, Of course I will do that, nephew. Salva felt a tiny spark of hope. With Uncle looking for his family, there was a chance they might all be together again one day. So here, I don't believe Uncle thinks that Salva's family is alive. But if we were to ask ourselves, why is he kind of not saying that outright to Salva? I'm going to make the inference that Salva needs hope to keep going. And so the belief that his family may be still alive might just give him the hope to keep going in the refugee camp when Uncle is gone. And I think that's why Uncle is kind of holding back. He's not necessarily outright lying, but he's kind of holding back and not telling him, like, Salva, your family is gone. All right, so that was today's read aloud.